Welcome to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack. Hello, everyone. 1 year ago today, former President Donald Trump's supporters violently attempted to keep him in office, despite the fact that he lost the 2020 election. But that election wasn't the first time Donald Trump received fewer votes. In 2016, Hillary Clinton received just under 66 million votes for President of the United States, while Trump received just under 63 million votes. Hillary received nearly 2.9 million more votes than Donald Trump. The Electoral College is the reason Donald Trump became president by a margin of 304 to 227. So what is the Electoral College, and is it antiquated? Well, let's get down to business. Today, the business of being Black is abolishing the Electoral College. Please welcome Pennsylvania State Representative and candidate for United States Senate, Malcolm Kenyatta. Hi, Malcolm.
Tammi Mack, good to be with you.
Research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership, Gautam Mukunda. Hi, Gautam.
Hi, Tammi. Great to be here.
The host of A Fresh Perspective will be joining us soon. And the host of The Reality Check, Charles Butler, is here with us now. Hi, Charles.
Hi, how are you?
So the first question, as usual, it's traditional on the business of being Black. Why should Black people care about the Electoral College? Let's kick things off, Gautam.
Well, because they are massively disadvantaged by the way it works. If you are a candidate for the president of the United States and you want to appeal to, and you want to win the Electoral College, you got to win at the state level, not the popular vote, which means that, say, every African-American vote in Alabama or Mississippi or states that we know are going Republican is not worth contesting. It's just not worth your time and energy. And you should, any candidate who did that should be thrown from the race for not knowing what they're doing. Although it works that way too. If you're a Black voter in California, and your vote is not worth going after because we know that state's going to go Democratic. So what's the point, right? Any candidate who campaigns in California doesn't know what they're doing either. So if you are a voter of any kind, but particularly a Black voter, because the way Black voters are distributed, you should care deeply about the Electoral College because the odds are pretty high that it means that your vote does not matter.
Malcolm, why should Black people care?
You know what? Listen, as you said in your opening, we are a year away from a violent assault on our democracy. And I remind people all the time that this democracy is an experiment. It's an experiment in self-governance. And I think the question for all of us is, do the things that we're putting in this experiment, do they make democracy stronger? Do they include more people in the process? Or do they lock folks out of the process? It's very clear that the Electoral College has locked out certain voices out of the process. Listen, I've stood for election multiple times, running for the US Senate right now. If I get one vote less than my opponent, I'm not in office. But clearly, that's not the way the presidency is currently constituted in terms of how we decide who the ultimate winner is. That diminishes the voice, the power, and the impact of Black and brown voters all across the country. And I've been a proponent for a long time saying we need to get rid of it.
Charles?
Well, of course, I think that the founding fathers had a great idea, first of all. And there's a reason that we don't elect the president per popular vote. If you look at the country and you look at how the presidency is elected, so if you go to the popular states, as Hillary Clinton did, and she won in the popular states, if we gave each state a vote, she would have lost. So how do you come out with a fair assessment of who becomes president? And I think the founding fathers had an excellent idea in the Electoral College. And that's why we don't have tyrannies like we do in other countries. And people who come to this country need to understand how America works and how our democracy works and accept that.
So the founding fathers were deeply embarrassed by the Electoral College. They were forced on it as a compromise that they hated, which is very obvious when you read the Federalist Papers, their statements on the Constitution. The vision that they had in the Federalist Papers of how the Electoral College might work has no relationship to the way that it works today. I will also note that in the way that they set it up, it's true that they had states and senators voting, but the ratio between the smallest and the largest state is almost 10 times today what it was then. So the level of disproportionate influence that small states have today has no relationship to anything that they could have anticipated when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution. I'll note that, in fact, the Constitution has procedures for admitting new states. And in the debate over the ratification of the Constitution, there was some debate that this should not happen because the founding fathers said, well, what would happen if the power of the original states was diluted? And the response was it was inconceivable that more states could be admitted than there were in the original one. So there could never be more than 7 or 8 states that were ever admitted to the country. So this wasn't a real concern. Last time I checked, we had 50 states. And so we should realize that the situation is different from what the founding fathers envisioned. And in fact, we should also admit that they themselves did not want to do the structure that they were forced into putting into place.
But I think Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers is very clear about the importance of the Electoral College. And you're right. It is not perfect, but I can say this about our so-called democracy. We call it a democracy, but it's really a republic. It's lasted for over 200 years. It's been successful. This is the only country I know, and I've been around the world, that you can go from poverty to being a millionaire without birth, by your own merit and by getting your own opportunities and having the right opportunities. My thing is simply this, that people should have opportunities. And I think we're moving towards that, more equal opportunities for people. But we're not a perfect country. We never have been, but no country's perfect. But I think we've done a good job.
And I think the fact that imperfection is, as you say, we are imperfect. And the reality is our founders understood that our Constitution would need to change, right? That's why they also lay out a process by which the Constitution could be amended. Our founding fathers had a lot of prescient ideas, but they had a lot of bad ideas. And the reality is we as a nation have always pulled this country, most times Black and brown folks, have pulled this country in some cases kicking and screaming to be better, to be more reflective of this more expansive version of inclusion, regardless of where you're from and how you worship. That is fundamentally true. But I don't think our founders ever envisioned that the compromise that they got to in Philadelphia in that hot summer would be the last thing that we had to say about the governance of this great country.
So when you say that, I think that's interesting in that when we talk about the compromise, we talk about the 3/5 clause, for instance. Most people don't even understand what the 3/5 clause is, and it's taught, and how I was taught about it before I actually read about it in college, was that the founding fathers thought we were 3/5 of a person, and that's what we amounted to. They never addressed, when I was in high school, we never addressed the fact that this was about the apportionment in the House of Representatives, and splitting up the House of Representatives. As you alluded to, when we talk about expanding the government or making amendments, I think that this is a country that has done that. We fought a civil war. And you talk about kicking and screaming in Black folks, and I don't even want to talk about brown folks, because brown folks really don't enter into this argument, because your so-called brown folks were white folks 20 years ago, 30 years ago, certainly. So, but Black people had laws written against them on the state level and in federal legislation. So we need to deal with that, like the Fugitive Slave Act. I mean, how could a democracy have a Fugitive Slave Act?
So, I think to your point,
hold that thought, Gotham. I want to get back on track here. I want to help our viewers who don't know understand exactly what the Electoral College is. So, Gotham, how does it work?
So, the way the Electoral College works, and I'll say most of this is not mandated in the Constitution, but the way the Electoral College works currently in all but 2 states is the winner of a popular vote in that state is awarded all of that state's electors. The number of electors is determined by the number of senators, that's 2, plus the number of representatives that the state has in the House, which is driven by population.
So stop right there. You're saying by the number of electors. So explain what an elector is.
So an elector is who actually picks the president of the United States, right? So there are the sum of 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate, 535, plus 3 people from the District of Columbia, 538, electors, are based on the vote in each state. They meet in the Electoral College and they vote for a candidate for president. And the person who's picked as president is the person who gets a majority of the votes from those electors. So the popular vote is only relevant in a presidential election at the state by state level.
Right.
Right. So you need to get
that he's talking
200
about aren't included are Nebraska and Maine.
Yeah, that's right. You need to get 270 to become president of the United States. You need to get 270 electoral votes. The number of votes you get from the people. In fact, you could win the president of the United States with about 25 to 30% of the popular vote. Right? The other person gets 70%, you get 30%, and you could become president of the United States if you get about 30% in the right states. This seems unjust, to put it
And that has to be an anathema to this basic principle of one person, one vote. And we see how this convoluted process almost allowed folks who were not interested in respecting the will of the people to basically overturn the last election. This really, nobody can give, and I have not heard even today, a strong argument for how this answers a basic question of does this or does this not help our democracy thrive into the future? And I have not heard an argument of how it does that.
Malcolm, I just want to follow up on that, right? It is true that we live in a republic, but a republic is a type of democracy. Correct. Saying that we live in a republic, not a democracy, is like saying that you have an orange, not a fruit, right? We live in a democracy. The United States is a democracy, and one of the things that we do as a democracy is try to respect the will of the people. The changes that we have made in the Constitution over time, 27 of them, on the whole, are meant to make the Constitution more democratic, make it line up with the will of the people, because that is what makes the United States special, that it is where the people rule. That's where that is our great gift.
And some people believe that the Electoral College doesn't allow for that. We're going to keep talking about it when we continue on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack on FOXSOUL. Stay. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack. Today, the business of being Black is abolishing the Electoral College. Please welcome Pennsylvania State Representative for candidate for United States Senate, Malcolm Kenyatta. Research Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership, Gautam Mukunda. The host of A Fresh Perspective, Jeff Charles, is here. Hi, Jeff. And the host of The Reality Check, Charles Butler, on deck. So let's talk about the Electoral College being antiquated. Is it a relic of slavery? Let's get you in on this, Jeff Charles.
Yeah, I don't think the Electoral College is so much about slavery, especially since we don't have slavery today. Look, I mean, there is no system that is going to be perfect, but I think at this juncture, there really is no point.
But hold on, Jeff. You said since there's no slavery today, but this is a concept that was created during slavery.
Sure. I mean, so is a filibuster. I mean, people want to abolish that or they don't want to abolish that. They say it's slavery. They say slavery. It's not slavery. Right now, we're living in 2021, right? So we need to discuss how this applies in 2021. And the Electoral College, at this point, I see no reason to abolish it. I mean, people talk about the national popular vote, all that stuff. The majority of our presidential elections have used the Electoral College, and they have also reflected the will of the people. And abolishing the Electoral College will cause more problems than it's worth. So at this point, I see no reason to abolish it.
Thank you, Mr. Charles.
I don't think you get to start right at where we are and act as if history doesn't exist. So because there's not slavery right now, because there's not discrimination right now, or the discrimination I guess you don't think there is right now, that these things no longer matter. I think what we just saw was our current system be completely abused and bastardized in a way that almost completely threw out the will of the people. We've had multiple presidents who have been elected without receiving the popular vote of a majority of the American people. And turns out those presidents have been Republicans. This is an absolute problem in a democracy where we ought to believe that it is one person, one vote. And again, there is no other elected position that I am aware of, certainly not in Pennsylvania, where you can get less votes than the other person and still get the office. Just on its face is wrong. And I don't understand how everybody wouldn't be saying that.
Malcolm, it's not just Pennsylvania. That's true around the world. there is no democracy in the world other than the United
Professor,
States.
I just wanted to make sure.
Get fewer votes and win the race. I'll just say, Jeff, you're entirely right. The majority of our elections do represent the will of the people, right? That's what we want. Well, here's the thing. The acceptable number of electoral outcomes that do not represent the will of the people is 0. If you have one election that does not reflect the will of the people, your system has failed. The point of an election is to tell us what the will of the people is. And every time the will of the people is not listened to, the system has failed. So saying, well, the abolishing the electoral college will cause problems, what problems could it possibly cause that are worse than the problems that come about when what the American people want and deserve is not what they get?
I'd like to answer that question, actually.
But that's your opinion. I've always been a conservative since I was able to vote. And the first presidential election I voted in was for Dick Nixon in '72. And that was in Michigan, at the University of Michigan, a liberal school. I lived in California where my vote didn't count for president. And I lived in Illinois where my vote didn't count as president. Am I crying about that? No. I participate in the process. Did I not vote? No, I voted, knowing all the time that my vote did not count in the popular vote. But that's how you get to decide the electoral vote and the electors. And I think it's really important because you did a great job of explaining what the Electoral College is. But it's really difficult to understand how you become an elector. I've been in politics for 40 years, and I still don't understand how you become an elector.
We were talking about electors, Gotham, earlier. So explain that. How does one become an elector?
So I'll say, the fact that no one knows the answer to this question in and of itself tells you how deeply flawed this is.
That could pose a problem in itself if no one knows the answer.
The answer, the answer varies at a state level, but the basic answer is each candidate selects a slate of electors who are pledged to vote for that candidate if that candidate wins the vote in the state. Okay, but these people are picked with essentially no care and no deliberation. And so you get things where electors then vote against the way they're supposed to and things like that. But in fact, the fact that no one knows is a reflection of the fact that everybody understands that this is a historical anachronism. It's like your appendix, right? Though people don't care, don't pay attention to who the electors are because we understand that is an artifact. It's
actually, the party picks the electors. That's the right answer. The state party picks the electors.
So legally the party picks the electors, but in an election, the party becomes an arm of the
But you know what? I'd actually like to go back to your question, Gautam. You're saying what possible harm could this cause? And by the way, I'm a conservative and I'm also a native Californian. So like Charles, I know what it's like to feel like my vote doesn't count. But when we talk about the damage, Malcolm, you alluded to it earlier. We have a huge debate over the 2020 election. We're talking about recounts in Arizona and in certain states. Now, imagine if there's a close race and we have a national popular vote and the election is contested. The idea of doing a recount on a national level, we're complaining about having to do it at the state level. Doing it on a national level will be an utter disaster. Talk about undermining faith in our democracy. That's how you get it. If you're worried about that, then you should want the Electoral College to remain in place. Because if there are these disputes, then if they're on the state level, it's a pain, but it's much easier to deal with than dealing with this at a national level where we're already divided.
Well, Jeff, let me say a couple of things. Any recounts are going to be done at the state level no matter what, because we do have state-by-state elections. The question is whether or not we should count all the votes from all the states and allow the person that got the most votes to be the president, as we should do. But let me also just say, there is no debate about the 2020 election. There are people who are lying about the results of the 2020 election, and there are people who are telling the truth. That's not really a debate when people aren't coming into it armed with any facts. Joe Biden won. He won every possible way that you can win. And just because somebody did a recount does not mean that there was something nefarious that happened. What you have is a bunch of people telling a lie. And every time that's said, that there's a debate, there's two sides. It's not. There's the truth and there's the lie.
Regardless of whether it was a lie, there was always going to be disputed elections. I mean, when Trump won in 2016, you guys were pretending that Russia interfered and allowed him to win. So either way, if we're doing this at a state level, it's much easier to handle than trying to fix this whole thing at a national level where we're going to find where the issues were.
Let me say this to Malcolm. See, Malcolm is in this. He's a little naive about this. In Chicago, this is the mantra: vote early, vote often. So don't talk to me about there's no voter fraud, okay?
So telling people to vote early, vote often, vote every election. Please don't talk to me about naivete when you were sitting here trumpeting things that are clearly disconnected from reality.
Well, there's nothing illegal about voting early or often, is there, Charles?
Yes, it is, in that it's multiple times. So people vote multiple times in Chicago. Vote early and vote often. That's the mantra. You go back to the polls and you keep voting.
It is important to say over and over again, because truth matters, that this is not true, right? It was true in the 1950s and 60s, but it is not true anymore. We have done comprehensive audits of American elections, and we have found that the number of fraudulent ballots is in the average presidential election, where 150 million ballots are cast, is on the range of 10 to 15, not percent, 10 to 15 people. And in fact, the Trump administration, right, the Trump people paid for an audit in Arizona in which they hand-counted ballots that were in a process that was designed to rig the process in favor of Donald Trump. And what they came out with was more votes for Joe Biden. So I'm not interested in debating this, because I'm not interested in debating with people who are uninterested in fact, right? Like, we have a fact, know what the outcome was. You guys had 60 lawsuits and you lost every one of them.
You keep telling us like Gerber. You keep telling the same lies over and over and over again.
If you were a baseball player, you wouldn't be sent back to the minor leagues. You would be sent back to single A. 0 for 60. That's the record, right? It's over. But now, to get back to the
I'm not looking at 2020. I'm looking at 2024.
I mean, it's clear that you're looking at 2024, which is why you keep telling these lies to try to diminish faith and trust in our elections. And that's not a small thing. It's actually a dangerous thing. And we saw a year ago what happened. People weren't just armed with weapons. They were armed with lies that I would hope you would stop telling. I hope that today is the day you turn a new leaf and stop telling these same lies, brother.
So let's hold that thought. Does the Electoral College give Republicans an unfair advantage? We're going to talk about
clearly.
that when we return on the business of being Black with Tammi Mack. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack. Hello. The business of being Black today is abolishing the Electoral College. Please welcome Pennsylvania State Representative and candidate for United States Senate, Malcolm Kenyatta, Research Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership, Gautam Mukunda, the host of A Fresh Perspective, Jeff Charles, and the host of The Reality Check, Charles Butler, is here with us. Okay, so does the Electoral College give Republicans an unfair advantage, Jeff?
Well, it might give it an advantage, but I wouldn't say it's unfair. I mean, one of the things that we haven't even mentioned here, and Gautam alluded to it too, he's saying, if it doesn't always reflect the will of the people, then there should be 0 elections that don't reflect the will of the people or the individual voter. But what we're forgetting is the fact that the Electoral College was meant to represent the states. It is the state that elects a president. Yes, the individual voter elects a senator or representative. But when we're talking about the presidency, the way the Constitution lays it out is that each state legislature is allowed to choose how they award their electoral votes, because it is the states that elect a president. So really, this whole thing about the national or the popular vote isn't really as relevant as it may seem. We are supposed to have a president who is elected by the states, not necessarily by the individual votes. This type of election works differently than others that we have in our republic.
Well, that's a good point. Gautam, I speak to that. It's the state that elects the president, not the people.
So, Tammi, it is. But let me answer your first question, because it's more complex than we just let out. It is true that in the last 2 presidential cycles, the Electoral College helped Republicans. But that is not a law of nature. In 2012, the Electoral College actually helped Democrats. Barack Obama outperformed his popular vote in the Electoral College. So Republicans who are so eager to rescue the Electoral College because it's helped them recently might well regret that decision the next time that when the wheel turns. It does go that way.
Gautam, you draw those conclusions. I don't see Republicans regretting anything. We support the Electoral College. As a matter of fact, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer today, they threw water on the Electoral College Act. Even Schumer threw water on that nonsense. Okay,
Charles, in 2000, I talked to members of the Bush campaign who were preparing legal challenges to overthrow the electoral vote when they thought that they were going to lose they were going to win the popular vote but lose the election. You guys are just, everybody here is just saying, let's do what's convenient for me in this electoral cycle. Let's not pretend
I don't have a lot of faith in those people, because I know Karl Rove.
Hold that thought, Gautam. Go ahead, Charles. Go ahead, Charles.
I grew up with Karl Rove in the Republican Party, so I don't have a lot of, Karl Rove is one of these guys who's been wrong about every election that he's ever participated in. He's given credit for winning Bush's campaign, and that's not true. But I'll tell you this, George Bush stood on his own as governor in Texas. I know black people who loved him in Texas, got 34% of the black vote when he ran the second time. He's a great guy. Trump is a great guy. And the media dogged Trump, and I can tell you for a fact, Al Sharpton, and Al can call you and tell you this himself. Al Sharpton told me that Donald Trump gave him the seed money for the National Action Network and $1 million a year for years to support him.
Well, that's hearsay at this point until Al Sharpton tells you. Gotham, go ahead.
So Tammi, I wanted to answer your question, right? It is true that the Constitution allocates electors according to state and population. Although remember, the House of Representatives has always been larger than the Senate, so they always gave the dominant vote to population. It is not purely at the state level, though it would be purely at the Senate. But it's worth pointing out, right? The number of people in the House of Representatives is not set in the Constitution. It is set by legislation. If you want to eliminate the small state bias in the Electoral College, or almost entirely eliminate it, it is very easy to do, and it does not require a constitutional amendment. All you need to do is something that we've done more than a dozen times in American history and increase the size of the House of Representatives. If you doubled the size of the House of Representatives, which again, you could do just by passing a law, it has nothing to do with amending the Constitution, that would immediately eliminate a large fraction of the small state bias in the Electoral College. The Constitution does not mandate the current balance of power, and anyone who tells you that it does not understand what the Constitution actually says.
Okay.
And also I would say, to Jeff's point of, we directly elect senators and House members, and the presidency is so different. Well, let's remember, we always didn't popularly elect US senators either. And so what we've done in this country is try, in some cases not succeeded, but try to meet the moment and try to be responsive to new facts, to new errors, and to what the people want in this moment. And I think what we all need to be asking, and again, I keep bringing it back to this common sense test. The goal for every single one of us, no matter if you're a conservative or a liberal, Democrat, Republican, or independent, should be to preserve this experiment in democracy. And I think the simple question is, does the Electoral College help? I don't think it does. And I haven't heard an argument of how it does. And for me, that's a very simple bar that it has to meet.
Unfortunately, Malcolm, there is no way to get, you talk about this new progressive way that we need to look at, but I don't know that anything can be new if senators are old, representatives are old, the presidents are old, and basically the laws of the land are becoming quite old themselves, and they are not moving with the times. So how can we keep something new if everything stays old? I mean, come on. They have had jobs for U.S. Senate right now. 50 years.
Allow me running for U.S. Senate right now, and I don't disagree with you at all. Millennials right now make up the largest voting bloc in the country, and yet there's only one millennial senator. Obviously, the Senate right now doesn't reflect the fullness of the American experience, and that's why I think it's fallen short in actually delivering on the fullness of the American promise. And so I'm with you 1,000%, and I hope to be a part of changing that here in a couple of months.
So America has been considered the standard for democracy around the world. If that's the case, why isn't the world looking to us to recreate what we have in our elections, Jeff?
Well, I'm not sure what they're supposed to look forward to. I mean, we are the freest society on earth. We are the greatest country on earth. There's a reason why everybody wants to come here. There's a reason why we have a migrant crisis. Our democracy, warts and all, with all of its flaws, our republic works. Are there always ways to improve it? Yes. Does our current legislature represent the makeup of the population? Probably not, but there are ways to change that. When we see something wrong in this country, we can work to fix it. Not saying it's always going to be easy, but we do work to fix it. And even getting back to the Electoral College, the original intent behind that was the idea that A state like California shouldn't necessarily be able to dictate what happens in Iowa. That's why we have that representative process. That's why we have the states that elect the presidents instead of the people doing it directly. There's always room for improvement in any type of system. I'm not convinced at this point that abolishing the Electoral College is really going to move anything forward. If anything, I see more problems with it.
Point, Jeff, when you talk about California, it's the most populous state in the nation with more than 39 million residents. And then let's talk about Wyoming, which is the least populous state in the union with less than 600,000. With that said, California gets 55 electoral votes and Wyoming gets 3 because of the Electoral College. Each elector in Wyoming represents about 150,000 voters, while each elector in California represents about 500,000 votes. So how is that fair, Charles?
That's not a question. I don't know about answering that question. You talked about democracies though, and most people. And Gotham can comment on this, but most people think that because a government is called a democracy, that somehow it's like our democracy. I've been to a number of countries all over the world, and I can tell you that when you look at Egypt, there's one president on the ballot. You look at Russia, there's one president on the ballot. You look at most so-called democracies, the Philippines, there's one president, there's one person running for president on the ballot, but these places were called democracies. So all democracies are equal.
So I think the United States is the greatest country in the world too, but I think the reason it is because it has never used that as an excuse to not improve itself. So it is true that there are many countries in the world that are not democracies like us. But there are many.
That answer, Gotham.
Thank you. But there are many countries in the world that are democracies like us, and they are able to do things that we should be able to do.
Oh, give me an example.
I'll just point out, India is a democracy. India president through a popular vote. There are more than
Hold that thought, Charles. Let him finish his thought. Go ahead.
There are more than 1.3 billion people in India. India is a tiny fraction as wealthy as the United States, and yet it is able to count the votes accurately every time it holds an election. If India can do it, the United States can too.
Well, let's
Tammi, quickly to your question that Charles didn't want to answer.
Break, Malcolm.
It's not
fair. We'll be right back on
fair.
Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. Don't go nowhere because these brothers is talking, y'all, and they don't want to stop. Welcome back to the Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack, and the Business of Being Black today is the Electoral College. Malcolm, you were ready to go when we went into break, so I got you.
Yeah, you asked the question to Charles, and one that I know you didn't want to answer, and you asked, was it fair? It's patently not fair. And I think that is the reason that you see so many people engaging in this conversation. It is not fair. We have to have a system by which we allow folks to vote, we count the votes, and the person with the most votes win. I mean, that is just a common sense test, and you don't have to be a scholar to understand that basic principle. And as was said, there's no other election where you don't count all the votes and let the person with the most votes actually begin to fulfill the duties of the office that they're running for.
Malcolm, you have stated in this conversation that this doesn't happen in state and local elections. Jeff, you made the point that states elect the president. So the question is, why isn't the Electoral College a system that's used in state and local elections, Jeff?
Well, I mean, we talk a lot about democracy, right? But the reality is that we are a republic, which means that you elect leaders to go to Congress and to make laws. And you even do that at the state level as well. But when it comes to the executive branch of the federal government, that is why the founders set it up that way, to where the states actually elect the president, because we are a republic. We are not a direct democracy, and we're not really heading in that direction, nor should we. So we can't have it be that way for every single election. But when it comes to the people we send to the federal government, which presides over the 50 states in the union, that's how it works. But when we're talking about the executive level, that's where states are supposed to make the decision, not necessarily each individual person. It does. The executive branch was set up differently than the legislature.
Tammi, I'll just note, there is one state that does have a model somewhat similar to the Electoral College. It is Mississippi, which adopted a constitution that forces governors to win state legislative districts. It did that deliberately because when African Americans were allowed to vote, the white population of Mississippi wanted to make sure that there was no possibility Mississippi could get a black governor. So that particular historical tidbit should make us think a little bit about what the effects of the Electoral College actually are.
Well, wait a minute, Gotham. There are districts in Mississippi where blacks outnumber whites.
There are, but they made sure that the districts were drawn in such a way that while there are individual districts where black outnumber whites.
Okay, but Mississippi is not the entire United States, though. I mean, that's a very interesting historical factoid, but we're talking about the 50 states in the Union, not just not just Mississippi.
Yes, but it is striking that the other 49 states all looked at this model and said, that's obviously wrong. We don't want anything like that, nor, in fact, would any of us want to live in a system or anything like that. And if the system of the Electoral College did not already exist, there is no one in this discussion who would suggest inventing it. That is, it is inconceivable that anyone would say, oh, we want to do this through some arcane combination of Representative Senate and House of Representatives. That number is fixed, even though the population has tripled since the time that it was chosen. Right? No one would do it that way. And we can look at all the other countries in the world whose democracies we helped to create after the Second World War. So we went around to all these countries in Western Europe and Asia, and we said, you guys need to be democracies. We're going to make sure that you are, and we're going to create systems for you. And in not one of those did we say, oh, you know what you really need? An electoral college. So the United States, at the moment when it saved the world, understood that its system was not perfect, and it could teach these other countries to do better than we ourselves did. Okay. I am a teacher, and I got to tell you, the best thing I ever do is when I teach my students to be better than me. But then I try to learn from their example, and that's something that we can do here too.
Well, Gotham, you pointed that out, that we created these democracies, but you forget one thing. These are parliamentary democracies. They're not representative democracies like our government, like our democracy. I don't know any other democracy in the world that's structured like the United States democracy or America's democracy.
So Charles, many Latin American countries have presidential systems. The president of India is elected through mass popular vote, not by the parliament, right? I have to tell you, Charles, that's just not actually true.
Okay.
Right? It's true that many countries have parliamentary democracy.
Okay. But
many other countries that have mixed systems, the president of Israel is also elected through popular vote. And there are many that have presidential systems as well. It is true. I'll also note that presidential systems are, they have a little history of being unstable. But whatever the case may be, it is factually the case that the United States, even in all of those countries where we created presidential systems or that created presidential systems in emulation of ours, the number of countries that looked at us and said, what we also need is an electoral college is zero.
True.
Zero. Not one.
But they're smaller than we are.
No one.
Jeff, I see you shaking your head there. Jump in here. Go ahead. Go for it.
I hear what you're saying, Gotham, but who cares? We are America. This is the way our system was set up. I don't need to be worried about what every other country is doing. The fact of the matter is, which country is the greatest on earth? Yeah, that's us, y'all. That's us. So just because not everybody else is doing it the way we do it doesn't necessarily mean that the way we're doing it is wrong.
We're not the greatest country on earth because we remained frozen at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. That's not what's made us the greatest country on earth. And if we want to be frozen back then we're not having this conversation right now.
We're talking about India. Why doesn't India have a migrant crisis? Why aren't people trying to move in hordes to India? No, they're trying to come here. Yes, dude, we are the greatest country on earth.
Okay, I want to.
That is not for debate that we're the greatest country on earth.
Here, guys. Let's yield. Hold that thought. I want to have some time to cover this because today, a year ago, there was an insurrection that happened at the United States Capitol. It is the first anniversary of the January 6th insurrection at the United States Capitol. If the Electoral College hadn't been in place, would the insurrectionists have even had a chance of overturning the election?
Of course not, right? Because they would not be able to show one. It's worth noting, while the election was not close to the Electoral College, it was really not close in the popular vote. Donald Trump got a smaller fraction of the popular vote in 2016 when he won than Mitt Romney did in 2012 when he lost, right? This was not a close election in any meaningful sense of that word. And if you were trying to overturn it, it would have been a joke, right? The United States has learned a lot in the way that we do things in the 200 years that we've been doing them. And this is a good thing, right? We were the greatest country in the world in 1789, But if we were still doing things the way we did in 1789, no one would think that was true of us.
Tammy?
One of the things we've done is learn how to count.
Tammy, first of all,
Go ahead, Charles.
the media and Democrats keep calling this an insurrection. I've seen insurrections. I've read about insurrections.
So what was this in your opinion, Charles?
No, the FBI, the director of the FBI, Director Way, when he was asked about the insurrection, when he testified before the Senate, he corrected them and said it was not an insurrection. It was a domestic terror act, is what he said. He said it was not an insurrection.
Well, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, put all that aside.
So Charles,
putting it aside,
Charles,
but it is.
Let's say that it was not an insurrection and that it was domestic terrorism. Is that better?
Yes.
Because
an insurrection is a violent overthrow of the government.
But isn't terrorism violent as well?
What people don't understand, and this wasn't a violent overthrow of the government, first of all. Nobody had guns. Nobody went in to kill anybody.
Incorrect.
The bottom line is
incorrect.
What happened was bad, but there's a lot that went on that we're not even privy to. But I'll be glad when they get to the bottom of it, because it needs to be straightened out and the lies need to stop.
Malcolm?
Yeah.
You're 100% true and you're 100% right in that the lies need to stop. It was an insurrection that was egged on by a twice impeached one-term president that was well financed by his friends and allies. And all these folks need to be held accountable, need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And the lies have to stop in conversations like this. We have to call it what it was, and we have to make sure that it never happens again. As Raphael Warnock said in one of his first speeches on the floor, the four most important words in American democracy are the people have spoken. And we have to get to a place where when the people speak, we listen and we move on.
Now, Welford, that wife beater, right?
Well, on that note, we're going to take a break. Not sure that has anything to do with anything, but okay. If we want to throw low blows, if that's the level of our intellect today, we'll take it there. That's the business of being black. We'll be right back on the business of being black with Tammi Mack. We'll be back.
Wow.
Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack. And today, the business of being black is the Electoral College. Please welcome Pennsylvania State Representative and candidate for United States Senate, Malcolm Kenyatta, Research Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership, Gautam Mukunda, the host of A Fresh Perspective, Jeff Charles, and the host of The Reality Check, Charles Butler. Malcolm, you are running for senator.
I am.
Why?
Because our democracy is really at a crossroads right now, and I think our government has to be able to answer a simple question of who does it work for, and I think it ought to work for working people. I desperately think that we need a government that actually works for and centers working families like mine, people who are going to work every single day, doing the right thing, and at the end of the month not able to make the ends meet. That was my story. It's the story of too many Americans, but frankly, it's not the story or the experience of a lot of the 100 people we have sitting in the U.S. Senate right now, and we have to fundamentally change it. And I think our election is about doing that.
I may be going off the beaten path with this, but every politician tells that same story, from Jimmy Carter and his peanuts to I don't know, to Barack Obama. I don't know, but we always hear this. I'm fighting for the people, the working class. I too was once poor, and then you get in there and you're no longer poor, and you're no longer a part of the people. So how?
Well, I will tell you, the Senate has never elected anybody like me, not even close. I lived 6 different places by the time I graduated high school, got my first job at 12, washing dishes. And sadly, I buried both of my parents by the time I was 27 because they just didn't have good health care. We've never had an African-American run for the U.S. Senate, or person of color, period, run for the U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. We've definitely never elected an openly gay person of color to the U.S. Senate, or an openly gay man ever. But beyond that, we haven't elected somebody who understands what I know about what it means when government doesn't work. And this is why it is desperately important that we don't just have people who are spokespeople for concerns of working people, but to have actual working people. I think we ought to actually elect the people we're saying we're fighting for. So you're right. So we don't have politicians who are, telling a story of somebody that they memorized on a palm card, but you have somebody in that body who understands and who has skin in the game on what happens. And of all the people you mentioned, none of them have skin in the game like I do.
I'll tell you one thing. I really wish that that these campaigns and elections were not funded elections. I feel like every candidate should have the same amount of money, an equal amount of money to run.
Hear, hear.
And I think that would definitely make it more about the people. Gotham, what can you tell us about your book, Indispensable, When Leaders Really Matter? And when can we expect your forthcoming book, Picking Presidents?
Well, thank you, Tammy. My book, Indispensable, Leaders Really Matter, I was trying to answer the question, when do individuals make a difference? When is it that an individual person in the right place at the right time can change a company, a country, or even the entire world, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse? The book was published in 2012. It was not obviously about contemporary politics. You can see from the photos on the front. None of the people I talked about are in contemporary politics, but somewhat to my surprise, it predicted Donald Trump so accurately that the Washington Post said that it was written like I had a time machine. That was totally an accident. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't plan that, but I'll take credit for it. And so my second book, Picking Presidents, is about trying to understand how is it that we should evaluate presidential candidates to answer a very simple question. Can this person do the job? Even if they're not my party, even if I don't agree with them on policy, do I feel comfortable with the idea that this person is in the White House determining the fate of the country and maybe even the world? And so that's my second book that comes out in October.
Love it. Can't wait for it. Charles, you have been a guest on the show before. We love you. Love to have you. I always love your perspective on everything. The Reality Check. That is your podcast.
It is. And, we've expanded. We're on about 200 stations. We're also on a network called blacksandwhites.us. So we're having fun with that. We're having a lot of fun with what's going on in the country. I'm working on a book called The Miseducation of Black Americans, misled by preachers, teachers, and politicians about the pursuit of the American dream.
Excellent. Sounds great. Okay, Jeff, a fresh perspective. You're always on the show too, giving us a fresh perspective. Thank you for being here today. Tell the people about the Fresh Perspective.
Yeah, Fresh Perspective is my podcast. I'm doing a lot of work on pouring into the audio version of my podcast. Both Gotham and Charles will make me feel bad about not having written a book yet, but I'm going to be working on that this year. So a Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, you can get that anywhere you get your podcast. I talk about the issues of the day from a conservative perspective, but I don't do just the fluff and the superficial, and I don't just toe the partisan line. If you know me, you know I will go against my party all the time, just as much as I do against Democrats. So if you want more of a nuanced perspective on the issues, and then check me out on YouTube and also wherever you get your podcasts.
So Malcolm, should the Electoral College stick around or not?
No.
Why?
I think for all the reasons that we've discussed today, we are at a place right now where I think certainly we need to have intensive policy debates, but we also need to use the common sense test. The Electoral College makes no damn sense.
Jeff,
we need to allow
Electoral
folks
College
to vote
stick
and
around
then
or
to
not?
move on.
I believe the Electoral College should remain in place. I mean, no system is perfect, but it was set up that way for a reason. I do think that the states should be the ones that elect the president.
Gotham, your thoughts on the Electoral College, yay or nay?
We can just make it irrelevant. All we need to do is either triple the size of the House of Representatives, or we pass the National Popular Vote Compact, where states whose electors account for majority of all electors say they will award their electoral votes to whoever gets the National Popular Vote majority. In either of those cases, the Electoral College will basically cease to have an impact on American politics. So I don't care if it's around or not, because it just won't matter anymore.
So you're saying just make it as a matter of fact.
Make it irrelevant.
Irrelevant. Charles, Make it irrelevant, he says. Should the Electoral College stick around or not? Nah?
It should stick around. And, I'm a believer, I'm traditional. So the bottom line is I believe, like John Adams, that the Constitution was written only for a moral and religious people and to the governance of none other. So yes, we should have the Electoral College. Yes, we should continue to elect our president that way. And that's where I am with that. None of the arguments today have convinced me of anything else.
So,
do you think any of the arguments today would have convinced you?
No.
Is there really an argument that could convince you, Charles? I don't think so. Right?
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, but it goes back to something that Malcolm said about common sense. And when you look at common sense, you would know that a popular vote, and Mr. Charles pointed that out well, that if we use the popular vote when we have these disputes, it would be crazy. So anyway, it's going to be interesting. The Electoral College is not going anywhere. Even Chuck Schumer said that. So how do I know?
We'll see what the future holds for America. And I appreciate you all talking about the future of America and its Electoral College. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Malcolm. And thank you, Gotham, for being on Business of Being Black. You guys stick around for Hollywood Unlocked. I'm Tammi Mack, and that is the Business of Being Black on FOXSOUL. See y'all. Peace.